Good day, and welcome to the Office of Family Assistance National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse webinar entitled, Working with Young Fathers, Tips from the Field. As a reminder, today's conference is being recorded. At this time, I'd like to turn the conference over to Nigel Vann. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, just wanted to let you know that we do provide these webinars on a bi-monthly basis, and there's a bunch of other resources available. The idea is to maintain a learning community that you can contribute to and learn from. So as always, we welcome and encourage your input and participation. Just a few notes and reminders about the screen that you're seeing. This webinar is being recorded, so there'll be a recording of the webinar that you can listen to, a transcript and all the presentation materials. They'll be posted on our website, fatherhood.gov, in the next few weeks. So you can check back and review this if you want to at that time. At the end of the webinar, there will be a Q&A session with the presenters, and if you have a specific question for the presenters, we ask you to put that in the box that you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, where it says Ask a Question. And we'll ask as many questions during the Q&A period as we can. If we don't get to all of them, we'll ask the presenters to send us some of those replies, and we'll post those on the website. You'll also see on the left of your screen, and I see quite a few of you have already found that, there is the chat box, and you can chat among yourselves there, introduce yourselves to each other, and we certainly encourage that. At the bottom of the screen, there's a section with downloadable resources. You can download the bios for each of our presenters there. There's also a list of helpful resources that you can download, and there's a lot of good information in there. And in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a number of websites, including websites for the Clearinghouse and the two presenters today. So let me move us to our next slide here, and this is just an overview slide of the Clearinghouse. And I know those of you who've been on before have seen this, so we just wanted to make sure you're aware of what we have. It's the work we do here at the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse is supported by funds from the Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families Office of Family Assistance. The resources are useful for fatherhood practitioners, for fathers, researchers, policymakers, and you can find the materials at our website, fatherhood.gov. We've highlighted a couple of the links there within the website. You can find our toolkit, which we're going to say a bit more about in a minute. You can also find archives of all our webinars. You can always send us an email at info@fatherhood.gov. And we particularly encourage you to make note of the phone number there, 1-877-4DAD-411. That's a number where there are professional mediators on that line. There are people who know about fatherhood programs around the country. So you can call with any questions. You can encourage fathers and mothers to call. It's particularly useful if you have a father and mother who have some kind of issue that they would like someone to talk to about that. We can help refer with child support issues, all sorts of things. So it's a very useful resource, and we always encourage people to take note of that, share it with the fathers you work with. And you can join us via Facebook and Twitter as well. Also want to draw your attention to the bottom of the screen where we have a few emails. Kenneth Braswell, who's the project director for the Clearinghouse, and Patrick Patterson, our project manager. And we also have a new representative at the Office of Family Assistance, John Allen. Unfortunately, John hasn't been able to join us this morning, but he will be here with us for future webinars. So what we're going to be talking about today again is working with young fathers. As part of that, we're going to give you an overview of the latest addition to our Responsible Fatherhood Toolkit called Working with Young Fathers. And then we're going to have tips from two extremely experienced practitioners. They've both got 20 years or more of experience working with fathers in one way or another. And you can just see a small picture there where you'll see Haki Nkrumah there in the white shirt, and he's the founder and CEO of the Young Fathers of Central Florida, based in Orlando, Florida. And on the far right of that picture is Johnny Wilson. He's the executive director at the Young Fathers of Santa Fe here in New Mexico, which is where I'm stationed as well. And you'll be hearing from both of them. They have a lot of tips and experience to share with you. Again, you can download those resources from the Helpful Resources box. It includes resources that are also in that toolkit section. And where it doesn't put them in the list there, it just gives you a link to those. But it's also got some more recent resources that I think you might find particularly interesting, including a toolkit that's from the Office of Adolescent Health, and there's also a spanking brand new report from January of this year from the Center for the Study of Social Policy that's got some interesting stuff. And then again, we're going to end the webinar with a Q&A session with the presenters. So do send your questions in for that. Again, this is just a reminder where you put your questions. So let me move into talking more about what you've got in the toolkit here. If you haven't been to fatherhood.gov/toolkit, we certainly encourage you to. You can download any of the materials there. You can print out the toolkit as well. We don't have any more hard copies of this, but it is there for you to delve into. It's been online since 2013, and as the name implies, it really is a Responsible Fatherhood Toolkit, resources from the field. Much of the content comes from conversations, interviews, site visits that we've had with experienced practitioners over the years. People who've been there, done that for a good long while. And the toolkit also draws on published research and many other resources. There's tips and suggestions from the field. There's links to relevant resources. There's activities that you can download. The activities have been excerpted from many of the leading fatherhood curricula. So if you're looking for a new activity to engage the dads you work with, you might well find something useful in there. So that's in the activities section. You can see in the brown buttons there. The first one is the home button, and then you can click on About, Start, Build, Work. Activities is where you find the downloading activities. And in the Work section, you'll see that's where we've recently added this section on working with young fathers. The toolkit itself is intended as a living document, so we really do invite feedback and recommendations for new content and resources that might be added to it. The last one, as I said, is this one on young fathers. We also recently added a section on working with incarcerated fathers, which was the topic of our last webinar in January. And one other thing I would note about this, given that we're going to be hearing from Johnny Wilson from the Young Fathers of Santa Fe, there's quite a few quotes in here from former colleague of his, Barry McIntosh, who was the original director there at the Young Fathers program in Santa Fe, and we've got several quotes from him that have stuck with me over the years, including, he said a couple of things like, when you first meet a dad, you should be spending more time listening to him than talking to him, i.e., you got to hear what his needs are before you start telling him what you can do for him. And when you do start talking about what your program might be able to do for them, Barry always used to say as well, however much you want to help him, be very careful that you don't overpromise. Don't promise anything that you can't deliver, that you're not sure you can deliver. Another thing I'd like to point out here is that I think you find this in the About section. We have a short section on the development of the responsible fatherhood field, which really goes back to the mid-70s and 80s, that's when the work was really starting to take root. And it's interesting, I think, to note that a lot of that early work, particularly in the 1980s and 1990s, it was focused on teen fathers and younger fathers. I think that was partly an offshoot of work that was being done at the time to support young mothers and also to help reduce teen pregnancy rates. And there was a growing recognition that you just couldn't work with the girls. You really had to start working with the boys. And that was actually brought home to me when I first got involved in this work, which was in 1988. And one of the first publications I picked up was from the Children's Defense Fund, and it was titled, What About the Boys? What are we doing for the boys? Since then, we've seen a real growth in the number of programs for fathers, but there really were quite a few around at that time as well. During the 90s, we saw more emphasis, I think, on helping older dads, often with employment and child support issues, and that was obviously because that was often because there were public policy points you could make and arguments for funding if you could help guys get a job and pay their child support. And since 2006, the field has really benefited from increased federal support through the Office of Family Assistance, providing funds for programs and initiatives, including, of course, the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse. Back in those early days, in the 80s and 90s in particular, there was a growing number of small community-level initiatives. They were just sort of really grassroots affairs that were seeing the need to help young dads. And the first job I had was managing a 2-county program for dads in Maryland. And I remember I started looking around to see who else was doing this work, and I was really surprised that there were a lot of these programs around the country. And then there were also a couple of national demonstrations that you can read about in this section of the toolkit. There was a teen fatherhood collaboration from 1983 to 85 that involved 8 sites around the country. And then there was the Young Unwed Fathers Pilot Project in the early 90s, and that they had 6 sites. The teen fatherhood one had 8 sites. But they both showed that, contrary to a lot of stereotypes, young dads were more involved in their children's lives. It may have been, obviously, those are the kind of dads that would come to the program. But dads did want to be involved in the lives of their children, and they would participate in programs if those programs were organized in a way that the dads felt welcomed and really felt that they could get something out of those programs. Now, I was fortunate to work on that Young Unwed Fathers pilot project. I was a program officer for the sites in that project around the country, and so that for me is really when I sort of, this has since then become what I do. And without working on that project, I'm not quite sure where my life would have gone. But it was as a result of that, I really felt that we can have some of the biggest impacts in this work by working with the younger dads while they're still in a good relationship with the mother of their children and before they begin to accrue a lot of child support debt. So it's really encouraging actually to see that I think although there was perhaps a dip in the number of programs working with the younger dads in the 90s and even the early 00s, that in the last 5 or 10 years it just seemed like there's an increased emphasis again on programs that are working with dads. That there's a bit of an upsurge going on. I think we're seeing programs like Healthy Star and other home visiting programs that are really reaching out more to the younger dads, to the first-time dads, and we're going to hear more along those lines from a key when he gives his presentation. He's been providing a national teen and young fathers conference for I think 5 years now, and he was telling me how he's seen a big increase in the number of programs that attend that conference, but also just other programs around the country that have been talking to him about their work. So I just wanted to sort of lay the groundwork for what we're going to be talking about a little bit there. Now here's a closer look at what we have in this new toolkit section on working with young fathers. There's a section on the challenges that young fathers face, and we spoke about some of those in the announcement this webinar, which included that, we said that while they face the same demands as all new fathers, young fathers in their teens and early 20s face additional challenges as they move from adolescence into adulthood. You're still figuring out who you are as a person, and now you've got to figure out how you become a parent. And it's it's hard enough at the best of times to figure that out. So trying to figure it out when you're still not made the full move to adulthood, which is true, for a lot of guys in their 20s and even going in their 30s sometimes. I think I became a father in my early 30s, and I'm not quite sure how I would have handled it if it was earlier. So a lot of these guys, they haven't finished high school. They may not be married or even living with a mother with their child. They may feel excluded from the father role, either by some of the extended family. You hear about the gatekeeping on the mother's side of the family, or institutions such as schools and healthcare facilities that don't treat the fathers as though they really are the father of the child. And also the employment situation that a lot of young guys, particularly minority guys, are faced with in today's economy. And so it's, it is a real challenge there, and there's a real need for programs to help them with those challenges and to help them stay involved, because unfortunately, although research shows us that a lot of young fathers are involved and do want to be involved during those first few months and first few years, it does become increasingly hard for them to stay involved. And so that, we need to provide these supports to help them do that. So I'm very encouraged that so many of you have joined us today to listen and participate in this conversation. The other sections of the toolkit you can see there. I'm just going to give you a few of the sort of top takeaways that come from this, but it certainly is important to talk about what works in terms of recruitment for younger dads. What do you have to do differently when you're talking to younger dads than if you're talking to older dads? How do you help them with these co-parenting issues that can be really confusing? How do you help them deal with child support? How do you help them focus on their education and training, particularly if they're seeing the need to get a job so they can start paying child support? How do you talk to them about delaying subsequent pregnancies when it may not be in their best interest to have another child too soon? And we've also got some spotlights for a few programs, including the Young Fathers of Santa Fe program. So there's a section in here where we offer a few short tips from veteran practitioners, and this is just a sample of those. And it's very important to realize that when you're talking to these young guys and saying, hey, we've got a program to help you, be cognizant of the fact that they may have heard this from other people and they may not trust you, if they've been let down by other adults in their lives. So you really want to have staff who can be real, who can be sincere and approachable and non-judgmental when you're talking to these guys. I can remember being in programs where guys are talking about how many children they have by different mothers, and they're still in their teens, and you see staff rolling their eyes at that. You've got to be careful what kind of messages you send to men. So you've got to look for the right staff, and the earlier you can connect with dads, the better. If you can do it before the child's born, that's you can help them be there for that magic moment when the baby's born. And here's just a few more tips to connect with them. You've got to go where they are. You've got to get out in the community. You've got to go to the basketball court. You've got to go to the barber shop. You've got to go to places where you can talk to guys informally, just hear what's going on, and then if you've got something that you can offer to help, then you can continue that conversation. You've also got to think about using social media. Although just a couple of the words of caution on that front. We took a look at some of the latest research in terms of social media usage, and although the number of people on social media has obviously skyrocketed over the last years, but back in 2005, only 7% of adults, according to surveys, were regularly involved with social media. Now there's 65% of adults who regularly use social media, and there's 90% of people aged 18 to 29 using social media compared to 12% back in '05. But there are some income differentials, whereas there's a great number of people of higher income are using social media. Only 56% of the lowest income people regularly engage with social media, and only 54% of people who have a high school diploma or less apparently engage with social media on a regular basis. So you need to sort of touch base with the guys you work with and make sure what kind of social media or communication platforms they may use, because not only do you want to use that to let people know what you do at your program, but once they're in the program, you need ways to stay in touch with them, and if they miss a session, how do you reach out to them? So just sort of, those are a few of the tips that we've had from people. And also, practitioners talk about the real value of challenging young fathers to share their new knowledge and skills with others. It can be really useful if you've got a new group of guys starting your program to, in that first introductory session, have some folk who've already been through the program to talk about how it impacted their lives, and or to go out as you make presentations to other people in the community. And it's not only a useful recruitment tool, but it's empowering for those young men to be sharing with others what they've learned, and it's really interesting to hear those sometimes. And then just at the end of the toolkit session, and this is true for all the sections of the toolkit, we summarize a few of the top takeaways that we've been discussing in the rest of the section. So again, it's important to have understanding, caring staff who can talk and relate to the younger guys. As you design programs, you have to be thinking about the services they need and how you're going to provide those, and recognize that you can't do all that within one program, so you need to have these community linkages. And again, with the younger guys, we heard a lot of the practitioners talk about the fact that it can be a trap to think, oh, if I've become a father now, I've got to stop all my education. I've got to get a job now. I've got to support these kids, even if it's not paying child support. It's just supporting them. You've got to buy those diapers. Someone's got to do that. So helping guys find a balance between getting themselves some income, but continuing with their education, continuing with training so they can improve their job skills. And we've also heard that teenage fathers in particular, as opposed to maybe the guys in their younger 20s. When we're talking about young fathers, we're really talking about guys aged 16 to 25, maybe 14 to 25. But some of those younger guys, some practitioners find that it's perhaps easier to have them in a separate group from some of the older guys. Although you also hear from other folk, well, it's good to have them all together. Let the young guys hear from guys who've been there, done that, some of the wiser heads. So you have to sort of think about what's going to work best for you. It's also very important to work with other family members. A lot of times the young couple aren't living together, they're still living with their parents, so you need the support of the parents. I mentioned the fact that you hear about the gatekeeping role that the maternal grandmother may play in some cases. You hear stories about maternal grandmothers who've been telling their daughter, don't do what I did, and now she's pregnant, and who do you blame? Do you blame her? Do you blame that young guy, or do you help embrace and support them both? So fathers need some help in understanding the feelings of some of the grandparents, but they need help in figuring out how to talk to the grandparents, but also the more you can reach out to other extended family members and pull them into this sort of co-parenting team to help the children and keep the focus on the kids, the better. So we're going to be hearing about a few of these kind of ideas from our presenters today, and also ways to help them think about spacing out those future pregnancies. There's a very good resource in the resources section of the toolkit that comes from the it comes from the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy, and there's some activities in there that you can use to work with some young couples to help them talk more about how to delay future pregnancies. So let's see, what do we have here next? We have, we're going to bring Johnny up in a minute now just to talk about this. So I just want first to ask Nicole in the background here to bring up our first poll question. We've got a couple of poll questions that we're going to ask you to respond to. This is to help the presenters get a sense of who's listening, who they're talking to. So if you just look at what's on your screen, and which of the following best describes the age range of the fathers you're working with? And you can check just one of these, please. So do you only work with teen fathers? Do you only work with young fathers, generally age 16 to 25? Do you work with fathers of all ages? Do you work with fathers of all ages but provide some separate programs or activities for teen dads? Or the next one for younger dads? You work primarily with mothers, or you're not currently working directly with either of them? I'll give you a little bit longer to respond to that. It looks like the vast majority of folk are working with fathers of all ages, which is certainly what we expected. So thank you very much for that. I see there's slightly over 10% or around 10% that are working with the younger guys aged 16 to 25. So that's always very interesting to know. So let me just tell you a few more things about Johnny. You can download his bio and the keys from the resources section there. Johnny's actually been involved with the Young Fathers of Santa Fe program in various capacities. He was involved in starting the agency in 1999, and then served as a member of the advisory board until 2014, when he moved to being an employee providing direct services. And he assumed the role of executive director in January of 2015 when Barry McIntosh stepped down. And prior to this work, John did a lot of other work with youth in various capacities, including some very interesting work with families of special needs children. So he brings a wealth of experience. So let me hand it over to Johnny to share that experience. Johnny, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Hi, everybody. My name is Johnny Wilson, sitting here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where the Young Fathers of Santa Fe has actually expanded into central New Mexico. As it says here and on our initial slide, we started in '99. Actually, a precursor organization started in '99, and Santa Fe was one of the sites that of this project, the New Mexico Young Fathers Project, and I was responsible for getting the Santa Fe site off the ground. And that functioned until 2008, and the organization supporting that program had some troubles, and that program was going away, and Barry McIntosh at that time was in charge of the site, and he made sure that the transition from the New Mexico Young Fathers Project to the new organization he was beginning, Young Fathers of Santa Fe, was seamless for the participants. So we are, as I mentioned, we have expanded into central New Mexico, and so we are about to change our name to Fathers New Mexico. We have 4 staff people, one of whom is still the founder, who works with me on training for other organizations in the state that are wanting to serve fathers, and some other support he provides. And then there's myself, an ED, and I'm also doing direct service. And then we have 2 other case managers that provide direct service. I sort of categorize our main services as providing group support for fathers we work with, individual case management for those dads, as well as training and support to help other organizations engage with fathers. We meet and enroll most of our participants through high school-based programs that traditionally have been successful at serving young moms, but not so successful at reaching out to the dads. And our program is 100% voluntary. So even when we work with guys that might be referred by probation or parole or something of that nature, we have a tacit understanding that if they decide they don't want to participate in our program, that's okay with us, and we're still available to them when and if they change their mind. So we just want to be really clear with the guys that their engagement with us is voluntary. So what do our participants, what kind of characteristics do they have? So we're in New Mexico, which is approximately a 50% Hispanic state. Most of our participants, about 3/4, are Hispanic. By the way, that you might know that Hispanic teens, not first generation, not immigrant Hispanic teens, but first and second generation Hispanic teens are more likely than most other ethnic and racial categories to give birth. Often our families, often our participants come from families who are currently or have a history of receiving public assistance. Many of the fathers we work with do not have their biological father in their life, and also do not have a consistent male role model in their life who's present in a consistent way. Almost all of our participants are under 25 years old, and approximately 60% are under 18. They generally do not have recognized success in school. They have a lot of challenges in school, and they have we have a small number who have married or are living together with their baby's mom. That generally is not the case when we initially meet them or when their child is born, but happens within a couple years of the birth of their child. So things to keep in mind. That's the section I've titled that way. That's meant to be directed towards the provider, the individual who's working with these young dads. And hopefully that'll become evident why here as we move on. Most young dads genuinely want to be involved in their children's lives. These guys have, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of them not experience growing up without their dads or other significant male role models. They have an intrinsic understanding of the need for that, for positive male role models, and they want to be that. And they also want to be the opposite in some cases of what they've experienced. Some obstacles that prevent or limit their involvement include a generational fatherlessness. So there, in other words, there is not a clear understanding of how to be involved, how to engage with their child, how to work on conflict with the others around the child. And the lack of good male role models means lack of information about how to be a good male role model. There's also a substantial amount of social and institutional communication to the young father about children and family, and this communication can be discouraging. For example, most of us are well aware of maternal and child health resources. Please note the absence of paternal in that phrase. WIC is women, infant, and children. These programs may be available for fathers, but it isn't clear that they're available for fathers, and that's relevant. Other social discouragements, sort of an assumption that mom will be present, and sort of a acceptance, tacit or otherwise, that dad may or may not be present. Oftentimes, dads report going into daycare centers to pick up their kids and being treated with suspicion, or asked a bunch of questions that maybe mom wouldn't be asked. Same type of thing happens in health facilities. I myself can talk about being a much older dad, how when I was the parent present at parent-teacher conferences, I got, well-meaning appreciation. Wow, it's so great that you're a dad and you're here, but there's also a message that sends underneath that, like, we really don't expect you to be here. You're unusual, Anyway, and keep this in mind. Absent fathers often experience deep and punishing longing for their children and a diminished self-esteem. And it's interesting that fathers that are not present and active in their children's life are often not as healthy or successful as those fathers who live with their children. Things to know about working with fathers. So again, this is, as a provider, keep these things in mind. Young fathers are going to be far less capable, just as a developmental reality, of abstract thinking. They're going to be much more inclined to concrete thinking. This may, and one of the things that I hear from folks working with young dads is that they see a lack of empathy for the partners or their ex-partners, their baby's mom, and that's often expressed in phrases, like, what she did to me was wrong, so she is a, whatever. And that sort of illustrates this developmental stage, which guys, young men, tend to be in longer than the young women. And it doesn't mean they don't have the capacity for empathy. It doesn't mean that they don't have the capacity for developing more ability around abstract thinking. It just means that they're not starting there, and that's part of what we can do to provide support. So in other words, for us, the providers, we need to not assume that that's the way they are in some permanent way, but that we need to support them to develop these other skills. Working with younger dads, you really do need to approach things a little bit differently. You need to be prepared to revisit topics and to reinforce key points and ideas frequently, to come back to them. This is something I really recommend to us old folks, is to really be sensitive and aware of the language that we use. Oftentimes, if we've worked with young people for a long time, we've developed, for example, a real sort of anti-gang language. We all understand why we have that language and the problems we have with gang culture, but for some of these young men, it's multi-generation family involvement in gang activities, and there are some actual positive reinforcing activities that happen within these communities that we call gang. And gangs look different. And I'm not saying that, this is something we ought to aspire to. I'm saying do not disenfranchise this young man by essentially telling him that his upbringing in this culture is all wrong. There's a whole bunch of other ways that we need to be sensitive about language, but I'll just leave you with that point, is to be careful. Don't assume that you know what they mean based on your experience with that word or phrase. Establish an understanding of paternity establishment, that's the establishing legal paternity, and of child support. It's really important for us to know the ins and outs of what our child support enforcement agency is doing. It's very important for us to know the various ways in which a young man can establish paternity in a legal way. They do not have legal rights to their child until that is established, and many of them, of course, do not establish paternity legally at the birth of their child. So that we really need to be aware of that. Be prepared to translate all the legal languages associated with these ideas, of course. Help them to see clearly how the system works. And they'll have myths. They'll have myths or not even myths, but stories about how vicious child support enforcement can be, for example. And some of the stories may absolutely be true, but they're not applied to every guy. And so helping them to see that engaging the system with a positive intention to pay child support generally results in a dialogue rather than in child support enforcement attacking them. There's definitely a lot of work that we as a community could be doing with our child support enforcement agencies to help them to work better with fathers, but there's also work we can do with the fathers to help them work better with child support enforcement entities. And by the way, a lot of entities are changing their name from child support enforcement to less aggressive sounding names, and that would be an excellent start for those folks. Welcoming, so we're going to move on to baseline program needs. So this is, I was talking about what each provider should be doing, and now I'm going to talk about what the programs need to include. And the key point here is to be really overtly welcoming of dads. Young moms, they get pregnant, they know they're going to have to go through all this stuff, including giving birth, right? It's very intense, it's very real for them in a physical way. They tend to be much more inclined to engage programs that are out there and offered. Young men don't necessarily do that. And a lot of programs that would serve dads don't understand that they don't actually appear welcoming. So we really need to work on that as programming. And always be prepared to meet the dads where they're at, whether they're gang involved, whether they're using substances, whether they appear ambivalent about engaging with the child, whether they're in conflict with mom. Meet them where they're at, ask them what their needs are, talk with them about how they're feeling with regards to their impending paternity or as a dad. I definitely recommend coordinating services, coordinating with services that support moms. If possible, develop dialogue with the folks that are working with the moms that are providing case management. We all understand that confidentiality is important, and we can easily, in professional environments, articulate where those lines lie and still have conversations that support the whole family, these two parents, young parents, their child, as well as the extended families. Support mothers to encourage father involvement. Working with these programs that work with moms, often I get invited to come in and talk about what fathering, what the advantages of having fathers around are, what the differences of parenting tends to be between moms and dads, and how valuable that is for the child, and really be attentive towards gatekeeping. There's a lot of social communications to moms that support them to be gatekeepers to the child in often inappropriate ways, and so working with that tendency is important. And consistently providing supportive tools for improvement, supportive tools for the young men, parenting classes, opportunities to mediate with mom when there's conflict, guidance with regards to education, openness about what the young man wants with regards to his education as well. Vocational services, employment assistance. To continue with the program needs, please recognize the fragility of fatherhood at all times. There's a lot of things that can happen that discourage and send the father into feelings of despair around his ability to father his child. That's going to increase his likelihood that he's going to back away or feel chased away. So recognize the fragility of fatherhood and keep on that. Look at other males in the family and engage them as well. If they're in any way healthy participants in the family life, they can help to support this man, this young man, because we probably can't do it on our own. We're a small part of his life. Allow for differences between moms and dads. recognize that men have been trained throughout their lives to show how and shown how not to express emotion, that the only safe emotion is anger. And this is, of course, you know, I'm putting it in an extreme way. It's much more subtle out there in the world, but we have to help them with the more subtle emotions. We have to help them learn how to express those emotions, how to talk about what happened before they got really mad at her or their parents or the teacher or whatever. And men tend to be more action and solution oriented, so those are good tools to use. You know, if there's something broken on the playground, one of the ways to engage a guy might be to say, hey, this swing is broken, you know, I can't figure out what's going on. Can you take a look at it? Or we're having a problem reaching some of the other young dads. It's great that you're coming to group, but help us. What might help us reach out to some of these other guys that aren't showing up? They may love to be engaged in that way and feel very productive as participants in the program if they're helping you to solve problems. And always remember that men bring unique gifts to their children. Recruitment, engagement, and retention are what I'm going to cover next. Starting with recruitment, expect to be ignored. It will be a challenge for you to engage with these guys. Persist with respect, acknowledging their innate desire to parent. Look at all kinds of different ways to communicate with them, running into them in the hallway at the school or the program or whatever. Social media, as Nigel had mentioned. If you can get a text number, that's great, but prepare for those phone numbers to change, as well as the Facebook accounts and the Instagram accounts and all those options. So keep as many vehicles for communicating with these young dads as you can. And if you're not seeing them, it's okay to check in. Send a quick text saying, hey, thinking about you, hope you're doing good. Saw your son today, whatever. Connect with the moms and talk with the moms. Build trust with the moms as a fatherhood practitioner as well. You know, look and talk with the dads and help to identify issues that they may be struggling with, and tactfully offer support where you can provide it. Again, not over-promising. Reach out as early as possible. If you can catch these guys during pregnancy, that's awesome. But yeah, don't wait until, you know, their kid is here and they're legally on the birth certificate. Reach out right away. In order to, once you know who they are and you have contact information, how do you engage them? How do you really get them invested in the supports that you can provide? We find that giving them a safe, confidential space to express their concerns and their issues and what they want. And what safe means is that they feel welcome. So the posters on the walls aren't all just about moms holding babies and breastfeeding, but also represent dads. And they're also that we are free from judgment. Now, obviously, we're going to assess the needs of our guys, and you know, that involves judgment. But the kind of judgment I'm referencing here is that kind where they feel like you're telling them they're not enough. You're telling them that they're screwing up. You're telling them that this is what they need to do. If you hear yourself saying you need to, then you're probably then you as a practitioner need to stop and rethink how you're communicating what you're communicating. We find that offering groups for the young guys to get together and talk amongst them with each other. It's a facilitated group, but and we emphasize these concepts of safety that I just talked about within this group. We ask them to come up with their own agreements as to what's appropriate. They almost always come up with the same kind of agreements, but this is a really great place for the guys to get the sense that they're not alone and develop a sense of community, and they often begin to be very supportive of one another in their fathering. Here's just another reference to creating a safe space. Avoid the criticisms that undermine their tendencies. and their feelings of being a father and a strong man, and respond to the needs that fathers express, react to what they say they need. And retention is about consistently doing this and helping things that really become important over time is their parental rights and how to access those rights, learn the court system. Almost all family court situations can be done without an attorney, and if you can just provide them support and help them understand what it means to have their ex-partner served, what it means to go into family court mediation, and then take away some of the fear around these. Conflict mitigation is excellent to offer them, and be really welcoming when they show up and show appreciation for them. These guys really love to be appreciated for what they're doing. Even if it's just showing up, it's a good start. And continue to acknowledge them as they respond to their kids' needs, and as they take action on the issues that you're discussing with them. And there's a set of touchstones that even if a guy isn't responding or is sort of drifted off, that are good times to talk about re-engaging during pregnancy, birth, illness, when the child starts school or a daycare, loss of child care, developmental milestones, weaning, walking, talking, adolescence. All of these times are really good, or any major change in circumstances, really good times to re-engage or to engage initially if he never did engage in the first place. And so moving forward, as you move forward, it's all about respect. And part of respect is that you expect the men to be involved. You're expecting them to walk through the door, and you're welcoming them when they get there. No blaming and shaming. View the young dads as essential, not a risk factor. Invite them in again, invite them in. And understand father's motivation. We have been sent this message our whole lives as men. If you're a dad, you're a provider and a protector, and maybe try to use those internal motivations that they almost for sure have to help to encourage them as they engage fatherhood. Thanks for listening to me. I've taken too much time, and I'm going to just stop now.
That's fine, Johnny. Thanks very much. Yeah, no, I know you've got an awful lot to share, and we really appreciate it. Yeah. I think we'll hold off on our second poll question just because we did get started a bit late today as well. Let's hold off on our second poll question. If there's time, we'll ask that at the end here. So let me move forward and introduce Haki Nkrumah. Again, he's the founder and CEO of the Young Fathers of Central Florida in Orlando. He's been working for over 20 years with teen and young fathers. Prior to the Young Fathers of Florida program, he worked with the Jamaica Fathers Project in New York State. He's more recently been the co-founder of the Young Fathers of Metro Atlanta. He's written 3 books, which you can read about in his bio. Apparently, they're not available online anywhere, so if you want one, you're going to have to get in touch with Haki directly. And just one other thing that really struck me about Haki when he and I were chatting the other week, you know, it says in his bio that he was in the military for 4 years. He served abroad in Korea after his young son was born, and he shared with me the other day that at that time, when his son first started walking, he was over in Korea, so he wasn't there to enjoy that moment. So he pulled together a group, I think he said about 20 dads who were there in the military in Korea, and they started just meeting as dads to talk about the things they were dealing with. And from that, he's gone on to do this fantastic work he's been doing there in Florida and around the country. So Haki, tell us all about it.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me well?
Yep, you sound good.
Okay. I'm going to run right into our programs. First of all, I see that over 50% of the participants today work with fathers of all ages. So I'm going to try to keep...
You are a little bit faint, Haki. If you could maybe get the phone a bit closer or speak a bit louder.
Okay, you hear me better now?
Yeah, I think that's good, yeah.
Okay. Most of the people, it seems as though that's on the call today work with fathers of all ages. But since they're on the call today, it tells me that they are interested in working with teen and young fathers. If their agencies might consider, their programming important or teen and young fathers important. So that's the direction that we're going to go in. And by you on this call today, I'm going to go in that direction, even though a lot that I say pertains to young fathers and older fathers as well. We have a total of 8 programs with Young Fathers of Central Florida, and there's several programs that welcomes fathers of all ages. So even though our program is designed and our programs are really geared towards teen and young fathers, we do work with older fathers as well. Okay, so I want to thank Johnny for that good presentation, and Nigel. So I'm going to try to, I don't want to repeat what you guys said, but it might overlap a little, okay? So I'll start right into our programs. Young Fathers of Central Florida started in May of 2006, so this May will be 11 years in, and I've been doing this work for quite some time. So it's very important to me, and all of those who know me know that I've struggled each and every day to get teen and young father programs at the table with the other fatherhood programs, because we know that a vast majority of fatherhood programs in the country do not begin engaging fathers until the age of 26. So we feel that that's giving too many young men 10 to 15 years to be absent and dysfunctional fathers, since we have fathers from the age of 12, 13, all the way up to 24. But we design most of our programs for fathers 14 to 24. Our Dad-to-Dad Mentoring Program is a program that matches an older father with a younger father for a 1-year commitment. How often they meet is entirely up to the mentor and mentee, but all mentors do go through a 10-hour training program. So this program is specifically designed for those fathers, young fathers, who unfortunately were not raised with a consistent father or father figure in their lives. So this gives them the opportunity to see what responsible fatherhood is about up close and personal, not in a classroom, but up close and personal with a father who deals with issues that fathers deal with every day, the good, bad, and the ugly, the positive and the negative. They can see what responsible fatherhood is. So that's our Dad-to-Dad Mentoring Program. We have our Parent Training and Development, which is bi-weekly workshops on topics such as changing diapers, nutrition, shaken baby syndrome, SIDS, childproofing your home, disciplining your child, etc. This training is open to women, grandparents, other caregivers. They're all welcome. When we first started this training and development, it was only for fathers, but we saw that statistics didn't show that you have a large percentage of young fathers who child's mother live with them. They cohabitate with them. So unfortunately, we don't want to deal with that issue, because we want to paint the narrative that teen and young fathers are sexual predators, that they're out in the community just slaying women. That's not the case. Also, when we look at the large percentage of young fathers whose mother is 1 to 2 years older than them. In our Teen Fatherhood Academy program, we have 60% of our young fathers' mother is at least 1 year. Their child's mother is 1 year, 1 to 2 years older than them. So that defeats that narrative that these young fathers are out there that's irresponsible. And we also think that they're all estranged, that none of these young men are actually with their baby mother. And a lot of times they are with them. So we allow mothers to be a part of our training and development for our parent training classes. Father support groups, we meet once a week or once a month in Orange County, Seminole County, and Osceola County, which is some of the largest counties in Florida, besides Dade County and Miami area. And we allow all fathers, grandfathers, Anyone that spend time with children, we allow them in these father support groups, all ages. So this is one of the programs that I mentioned that is not age sensitive, 14 to 24. We have our Teen Fathers Academy, which is a 6-month training and development program for high school students, ages 14 to 19. We break this program up into a spring semester and fall semester. By the way, all our programs have measurable outcomes. We use evidence-based curriculum, and we do evaluations. So for those people out there who are starting fatherhood programs or presently doing them, I hope that you that you have measurable outcomes and that you are getting your program and evaluated. And it's easy to get your program evaluated because we all live near universities. Universities, it has to be independent evaluations. You can't do the evaluation yourself. You should have it independently done, and most universities will be happy to do that without charging. One program that's not mentioned on here, but which is a program that's very important to our organization, is our Gents to Gentlemen program. That's a character and etiquette development program for our 10 to 13-year-old boys. That's an 8-week program designed to help those young men to understand the importance of not being young fathers. So that's one of our prevention programs. It's called Gents to Gentlemen. And any program that I mentioned here today, you can contact me if you're interested in initiating these programs and what you do. All you need to do is just call, and we will work with you on these programs. Our next program, this program, our Young Fatherhood Institute, is an evidence-based program designed for colleges and universities. Our pilot program was initiated at Bethune-Cookman University in Daytona Beach. We wanted to go to the college level because we realized that there's a lot of young men who are in college who are fathers, but they have no services on the college campuses. Most college campuses you go to couldn't even tell you how many fathers is on the campus. And half of them couldn't even tell you how many mothers on the campus. When I went to several of these colleges, I said, look, don't your infirmary take data on how many mothers on the campus? So oftentimes you'll find a lot of resistance with these schools because, first of all, they want to act like there's no teen parents on their campus, but you can look at half of their football teams, and you can find plenty fathers on those athletic teams, basketball, football. We ran into a lot of those issues. So it's important for you to stand fast with that and say that, look, we're here to help the young fathers. I don't care what sport they play, but we're here to help them and the mothers. Because there's one university we work with that there were mothers dropping out of school because their baby's father was athletes, and they thought that they were going to be some NFL players. We told them, chances are they're going to be an NFL player or NBA player is slim. So you need to get back in school and finish your degree. So that's the Fatherhood Institute. Then we have our Young Fathers Initiative in the county jails. We fought 3 years to get an initiative in Orange County jails because we saw that there was a group of fathers that's locked up that don't get any services at all, and we wanted to get in there. We finally got in there, and we provide parent training in there. And the one thing about those individuals in the county jails, they're either going to prison or they're going to be released. Either way, they have to understand that they have to be parents, period. So those that get released, they need to know where they can go for resources when they get out. And those that send to prison, well, we call it parenting from prison. You got to learn how to be you got to learn to be a parent from the prison system. Just because you got locked up doesn't mean that you are not responsible as a father. So we call it parenting from prison. We help fathers understand that just because they're locked up, they need to still be parents. Last time I was at Coleman Penitentiary in Florida, there was a gentleman that said that, hey, I'm not a parent anymore. My daughter doesn't love me anymore. And I asked him, how you know that? Have you spoken to her? No. I asked him, how long have you been locked up? He said, I've been locked up for 10 years. I said, how old was your child when you got locked up? He said 2. I asked him, was his child 12 or 2? He said, he looked at me like it was a trick question. Your child is 12. She's gone through milestones. She's done things that you need to be there as a parent, no matter how it is. With the technology today, it's not like back in the day we didn't have Skype and we didn't have all these different ways to communicate. Find a way to communicate. So we call it parenting from prison. And then those individuals who get released, they need to know the resources, and we also connect them with our mentoring program. Okay? Then we have our National Teen Fatherhood Conference. That conference we started, we just completed our 5th year, and I'm glad that we had participants from throughout the country. On our line today, we have Fernando Rivera. I'm glad that Fernando is with us. I'm glad that Lisa Keyser and Marianne Carter from Brevard County, Florida is with us today. Leonardo Strout from Georgia. We have Mark Hines from South Carolina and Quan Fish from Michigan. All these people are doing excellent work, and these people are those people in the country that's moving teen and young fatherhood forward, and I'm glad you're with us today. But we had people from all over: Wisconsin, D.C., New Jersey, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, Maryland, Florida, and New York. And the reason I started this conference was because we need to begin building a national coalition for teen and young fatherhood initiatives. I was listening to Nigel talk earlier, and I know most of the people who work with young fathers was kind of shocked that he was talking about they was doing young fathers in the 80s and 90s, but it fell off. I come into contact with so many teen and young fatherhood programs today and think they're the only ones that's in existence, but they're not. There's quite a few out there, and that's what the conference is for, to build a national coalition so we can have a seat at the table when it comes to policy for fatherhood in this country, and we're not left out. We're not isolated and ignored. That's what we're there for. That's what the conference is for. And I hope to see all of you on this call, if you can be there next year at the conference. I'll move forward. Meeting services needs of fathers. You can read through this. I don't need to read through this, but wraparound services. We have to look at fatherhood, whether it's young fatherhood or young fatherhood or fatherhood in general. We have to look at it in a holistic way, holistic approach. That'll give us consistent participation, and that'll improve our retention. You know, when you don't have fathers staying in your program, it's because you're not saying nothing. You're not doing nothing. You're just sitting there writing numbers down. But if we look at it holistically, because most fathers and young fathers come to us with a lot of different issues. So we have to develop our wraparound services. We can't start trying to give every incentive in the world to fathers. Oh, did you have any food? We don't have any food. I ain't giving any food. Why? These are volunteer services. You guys coming to us voluntarily. So we're not going to give you this and give you that just to appease you and make you happy to come to the program, because once that gravy train stops, they stop coming. Then people start whining and complaining about retention. Oh, all our fathers are leaving. So the holistic approach is very, very important. And it's also critical that fathers under young fathers, the reason why I've dedicated my life to teen and young fatherhood is because teen and young fathers are the ones continually having babies. That's a problem. 45-year-old man not continually having babies. 15, 16, 17-year-old, they doing it, a lot of them unconsciously. And we have to understand that that's where that focus is. So that's why I get so excited when I hear people want to work with teen and young fathers, because that's a critical age group that we need to focus on. Outreach and recruitment tips. What do I have to say? Conduct community assessment. Don't use national data all the time to do your work. You need to get local data from your municipality, your area, where you work. But it takes work. People don't want to do work. They just want to grab a national data. Like one statistic I hear people say, oh, 75% of low-income fathers live within a 10-mile radius of their children. Okay, that's fine. But if you, Johnny, in Santa Fe, I think, has 65,000 people. And then if you a practitioner in Co-op City in New York, Co-op City got 50,000 alone in one complex. So you can't develop a recruitment plan based on that national data to your local environment, your local situation. You have to use your data, go out and get it. Do surveys, do needs assessment, canvass those communities, go to a midnight basketball, go to the barbershop, go to the salon. Yes, salon. I had a group of guys when I first started here. I said, meet me 6 o'clock at the salon. Why are we going to do that? Well, that's where we're going to know where half the fathers in this community are. right, from that salon. So you have to get that data. And there's one site, I don't know if you use, that I get a lot of demographics from. It's called zipskinny.com. Zipskinny.com. You can get any demographics you want for every zip code in this country. And there's a new site called zipwho.com. You have to do your work. You have to do your research. Don't just look at this national data and use that and try to relate that to the work that you're doing. It's not going to happen. I mean, we have people, we have counties here, for example, Lake County. All my fathers, 90% of my fathers are white there who live in trailer parks. You look at Paramore, Orange County, most of my fathers black there. And you got 80% of them between the age 14 and 19 are unemployed. They have a different need than my fathers in other counties, like Osceola. Osceola, the language barrier, 90% are Hispanic. We have a lot of language barriers and immigration issues. And then we have, Lake County. A lot of those guys there, they have employment issues and legal issues because a lot of them sell meth. And that's just a fact. That's just a fact. So we have to use our own data. Service delivery tips, start with priority planning. Everything's our priority. Develop action plans with timelines. Don't sit there with, we call them happy-pappy programs. Oh, do it when you want to. We'll complete this program when we want to. No, have timelines and set up high expectations. When you set up low expectations for your program, that's what you're going to get, low results. Navigating key issues, establishing paternity. Johnny talked about that. Najee talked about that. Parental rights is important because if you haven't established paternity, you have no parental rights. And a father don't want to be in that situation, but you have to know that. You have to have those because I'm telling you, having parental rights, it levels the playing field because there's no more the mother issue that she has control of this, that, and the other. She doesn't, okay? I'm trying to run through so I can get through in time. Okay, understanding handling child support, we know that. If you start your nonprofit or you working with young fathers, the first person you should collaborate with is child support. Family planning, fatherhood and parenting responsibility, financial literacy, majority of money issues in any relationship, the stress and arguments are usually surrounded by money. So you have to be financially literate. You have to be health literate. You can't get a job smoking weed. If you smoking weed, you know they're going to drug test you, so you can't get a job. So if you want to continue to do that, then you might as well not even try to look for a job, and therefore you're not interested in being the best father you can be. Responsible fatherhood is the best form of pregnancy prevention. Thank you. Hello?
Thank you very much, Aki. Yes, I was just unmuting myself there.
I hope you guys heard me well.
That was great. That's great. In fact, you actually had a few more minutes. You could have said a bit more. Let me ask you just to say a bit more about the paternity establishment.
145. Huh? Say that again.
I said, let me ask you to say just a bit more about the paternity establishment, please, Aki.
Right.
How do you talk about that with a young guy? Particularly if the guy, obviously it's really important that he understands that he's not going to have parental rights if he doesn't do that. But I know a lot of guys, they think that it means they're going to automatically have to pay child support. So
no, that's the card that a lot of young women play, because most young women they get their playbook from other women that tell them what they need to do. That's one thing young women do. They network and they talk about it. We men don't talk about that. But establishing that paternity, we let them know that you can either do this through being on a birth certificate or taking a DNA test. And there's a lot of services that will pay for that for you. But if you don't establish paternity, you can't even go, if your child gets sick at school, you can't even go up and get your child out of school. So paternity, establishing your paternity is so very important because it also lets the mother know that what she says doesn't always is not correct all the time. So because a lot of young women, unfortunately, we work with them, they actually think they actually think that they can get away with keeping their child from this man because he got a new girlfriend or he's late on child support. That's why we teach our men about child support to say you can get anything modified. Any order can be modified based on your economic situation. So that's why it's important for organizations to teach the young men. Do training and development to teach them about what roles and what rights they have. That's why we have family lawyers coming regularly in our training to help young men know what their rights are. Know that if you have a child support order or a visitation order, that if you're supposed to pick your child up a certain time, a certain date, and she doesn't do that, the sheriff will go get your child. So they have to know their rights. And people often also have to know what their state laws are. Because in the state of Florida, we don't even, like Brother Quan Fish in Detroit, his laws there are different than in Florida. So we don't even use terms like custodial parent anymore. We don't use that, visitation rights. None of that language is not even used in the state of Florida. So each state have to understand what their rights are. They need to understand what their not just the father's right, but the mother's right, because the mothers need to be educated also. They need to be told, young lady, you don't have the right to keep this child from this man. You don't have the right. So young mothers have to know that as well, and that's the big issue. That's why I get asked to speak more with young mothers groups than young fathers groups, because a lot of them just don't know, and unfortunately, Nigel, a lot of young mothers don't know. They just like I said, they're getting their playbook from a scorned mother who's telling her that she could keep her baby away from the father just because she wants to, So that's why it's important for that's why it's important for them to know what their rights are. Yeah. What their parental rights are.
Such an important conversation. Yeah, I'm really glad you brought it up.
I'm not breaking up too much.
And I've heard, I've heard guys that are having to wait to see other guys that are losing their kids for various reasons because they hadn't established paternity. So it's really important to have that conversation up front. And I really like the fact that in Florida that they're not using the words custodial parents and visitation as much, because even if you're in a state where that is still the sort of legal language, I always encourage folk when you're working with parents, talk about the residential and the non-residential parent. Don't be talking about custody, because custody is of an object, right? And don't be talking about visitation. Be talking about in time. Talk about the time that you get to have with your child. So, Johnny, let me ask you a question. We've got about 10 minutes left here, and if there's questions that we haven't had time to answer, we will certainly post responses to those later. But I know, Johnny, you've done work with, in fact, I think you're working with a group right now, right, of expectant dads. Can you just talk a little bit about the kind of things you talk about with them?
Sure. Well, of course, we help them to think about what being a pregnant mom entails. We talk about the struggles that the moms endure. We talk about the value of going to doctor's visits if she'll permit that, if they're in a relationship, and we talk about preparation, and of course, I should say, we also ask them, what are you feeling? What are your expectations? What's going to happen, do you think? And there's as many different answers to those questions as there are guys in our program that engaged with us prior to their baby being born. So obviously, from each answer is a thread of discussion about what they might need or what we might want to provide to them by way of support during that time. But we definitely emphasize, involvement, and if they're not with the baby's mom, to begin establishing a means for communicating about making decisions, asking politely to go, respectfully to go to appointments, maybe if phone calls or face-to-face is difficult for them, maybe looking at email or other forms of communication, so they can establish what hopefully will evolve into effective communication. Did that answer the question, Nigel?
Yeah, no, that's perfect, Johnny. Yeah. Here's one for both of you. Let me start with a key, but we often hear that it takes a while to get a program off the ground. I've certainly seen programs where they're all excited, but then you just get one or two guys involved. So how long would you say that a program should expect it to take before you can get a good group of guys going?
I'd say, you know, if you do your research prior to it, you do your demographics, you do your needs assessments, you know, because what some people fail to do is that they design a program based on what they think the community needs and not what the community actually needs. So if the work is done prior to it, it shouldn't take any more than a year because it's all about your prep work. But if you know, there's a difference, Nigel, starting your own 501c3 than working within an agency that has a budget already. So the approach will be totally different. If you're starting your own 501c3, then you have to really develop your a fund development plan, which entails, because you're not going to get a grant anytime in immediate, you know, future, because most funders, they want to have at least 2 to 3 years financial statements. So it's a difference between if you're starting your own 501c3, like I consult people all the time, and I always find out what exactly what their intentions are. Is this a 501c3 you're starting, or is it a part of an agency, like if you're with a Head Start or Healthy Start, or if you're with another agency that has a funding source. So it always depends. But if you go in and do your data, you know, your research, and find out what the needs of the community are, and see what resources, because one thing funders love when you go into a community and you utilize what resources they already have there. For example, like your recreation centers, which already have a basketball court, they have a computer lab, they have meeting rooms. Go in and use the facilities that's already, the resources that's there before you go asking for money. So that's what a lot of organizations don't do, and that's what we try to help them to do. Develop a fund development plan, which includes everything from fundraising to grants to yearly giving campaigns, but a fund development plan where you can get numerous sources of revenue into your organization. So that's what we do, and that's what we work with agencies across the country.
Okay, sounds like good advice, yeah. Johnny, anything to add in terms of the kind of things you've done to really increase participation in the groups?
Yes. So assuming, as Hakeem articulately pointed out, that you have the funding and a legal organizational structure in place, or that you're, you know, working within another organization, looking at it on a site-to-site basis, how are you going to make sure that a site works? If you think, do the research that Hakeem referenced, so that you know with some degree of confidence that the, let's say, school, just as an example, is a school where actually there's a number of teen parents and the school doesn't sort of try to get them to leave, and the school provides some resources and talk to the folks, the counselors, or if there's a teen parent program there, talk to the folks that are working with the moms, and begin a dialogue about how you're going to collaborate, and how am I going to learn, as the guy that wants to work with the dads, how am I going to learn where the dads are? You know, the moms, you know, very often are, you know, at some point pregnant and pretty obviously moms, or carrying the baby around. Dads may not, you know, and oftentimes, you know, we're working with dads that are at a different school, or not in school, et cetera, and more difficult to find and get that initial contact. So do that program research, and talk to those other providers that are around that dad or working with the mom, and find out how cooperative they're going to be. Are they welcoming of a fatherhood component? Is there anxiety around a fatherhood component? Can you work with that anxiety? And really, how you need your information on your guys. And then, you know, like I said, talk with the moms. Once you're in and you're beginning to work, start talking with the moms. Ask them how they're doing. Ask them how their baby's daddy is doing. And begin getting contact information. Begin regularly making an effort to reach out to these guys. Again, don't be disappointed or discouraged when it doesn't work right away. It often takes time. And and be okay with two guys involved regularly for a while. Let those guys start talking to their friends about how you weren't judgmental and you were able to help them out with stuff and help them to understand about paternity and et cetera.
Yep. Okay, great. Yeah, no, I think, just really important, as you say, to be reaching out to any agency in the community that, has contact with young men and encourage them to find out if they're a father, because a lot of times you have, say, an employment program or just a basketball program that's working with young men, but, if they know if someone's a father, then they can be making a referral. We had quite a few questions about co-parenting, but we really don't have a lot of time to get into that. So I'll ask the presenters to give us a bit of info on that we can post. We did get a question asking about if there's a specific website that shows parenting rights for mothers and fathers in each state. I'm not aware of anything specifically like that. You could contact the 4Dad411 number that we shared at the beginning. You can also, I believe in the section in the toolkit on child support, there's a link to, there's a map on the child support, federal child support agency website where you can click on each state, and it takes you to places where you may be able to find those things there. And somebody asked, how do we know who to contact locally if you want someone to come and talk to a group of young dads? I would say go to our state profiles. You can click the state profiles section on our website, and you'll see where there are local programs in your state. And again, you can call the 4Dad411 number, and they may be able to help connect you with somebody. So let me just bring up our final slide, which is the contact slide, just a reminder that you can send us emails at info@fatherhood.gov. You have emails there for the presenters. You can go back to these slides that they'll be posted online in a few weeks, as I say, and we will post answers to any questions that we didn't get to. And we are now going to bring up a link to the survey that we ask you to complete, and let us know what you thought about the presentations and other ideas that we may want to think about for future webinars. I know we're right on time now, but I'm just going to give Haki and Johnny just an opportunity to leave us with one final thought, just one sentence, guys. What would you leave the folk with as a chief takeaway message?
Johnny?
Hello?
Hello?
This is Johnny. I'll just say that having done this since '99, a lot of these guys I've worked with have inspired me. Really, really done fantastic jobs as parents.
Okay, thank you. You get the final word, Haki.
Hey, since doing this since the early 90s, a few years earlier, I'm just glad that we're to this point because, just like I mentioned, a lot of people know this is my passion to get teen and young father organizations off the ground across the country and internationally. And I'm so happy that we are at this point now.
Thank you. Me too. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's just so important, I think. So, again, we're heartened by the number of people who've joined for the webinar. Encourage you to go to Haki's conference next year. Keep on doing this work because the more we can engage with young dads and mums, help them work out on their relationship, help them understand child development better, help them talk about wait until they have that next child. Then we don't have to see them in some of the fatherhood programs that Haki was talking about, that are focused more on child support. So keep on doing the great work you're doing, everybody, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the presenters, you can stay on the line just for a minute.
This does conclude today's conference. Thank you for your participation.